world remembers her by a single name: the Iron Lady. A woman both admired and feared, loved and loathed. She stood where few women ever had, at the very heart of power, in a world built by men, for men. But behind that iron, there was a heartbeat. Behind the unwavering tone, there were nights of doubt and loneliness. Behind the famous words, "This lady's not for turning," there once stood a little girl in a grocer's shop, watching, listening, learning what it meant to work hard, to stand tall, and to never give up. This is not just a political story. It's the story of a transformation, of how conviction becomes courage, how belief becomes destiny. It's about a young woman who rose from an ordinary town to reshape Britain and challenge the world's idea of leadership. She was not born into privilege nor handed power. She built it, piece by piece, through intellect, persistence, and the quiet refusal to bend. Through triumphs and defeats, through isolation and fame, Margaret Thatcher became more than a prime minister. She became a symbol of determination itself. So tonight, as we step back through time and walk beside her through history's storm, we ask, what does it truly mean to lead? And what must one sacrifice to remain unbroken? If stories like this inspire you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more journeys through the lives of those who shaped our world. One choice, one dream, one heartbeat at a time. Chapter 1. The Grocer's Daughter. Long before the world called her the Iron Lady, she was simply Margaret Roberts, a small girl from Grantham, a quiet market town in the English Midlands. Her world was one of simple rhythms: the chime of the church bell, the scent of soap and bread from her father's grocery, the hush of evenings spent by the fire as her parents read aloud from the Bible. Her father, Alfred Roberts, was a grocer by trade, but in Margaret's eyes, he was something greater, a man of ideas. He believed that hard work was sacred, that thrift was a virtue, and that one's word mattered more than wealth. He ran the local Methodist chapel, preached discipline, and spoke of responsibility to the community. Every sermon, every late-night conversation in the small upstairs room above the shop became lessons that would shape her mind. Margaret learned early that nothing was handed freely. She watched her parents count every penny, mend every torn hem, and find pride in the dignity of work. Grantham was no place of luxury, but it was where she discovered that character, not comfort, was the true measure of a person. As a girl, she was quiet, but fiercely observant. Her teachers spoke of her sharp mind and relentless curiosity. She asked questions others wouldn't, not out of rebellion, but from a hunger to understand. When other children played, Margaret read. Dickens, the Bible, the lives of great leaders. She began to see the world as a series of problems to be solved, not simply endured.
In her father's modest store, she saw more than shelves of goods. She saw an economy in miniature: supply, demand, trust. She watched how fairness and firmness kept customers loyal. When disputes arose, her father listened, reasoned, stood his ground. Those moments would stay with her for life, teaching her that leadership was not about pleasing everyone, but about standing firm when rightness demanded it. And yet, the world outside Grantham was changing. Britain, still recovering from the Great Depression, was a country searching for its identity. The war clouds that gathered across Europe would soon redraw everything, from borders to beliefs. For young Margaret, those days planted a seed that chaos could be conquered by conviction, that strong principles could anchor a trembling world. She grew up in a time when women were expected to be dutiful, modest, silent. But Margaret's father saw in her something unyielding, a fire that needed tending, not extinguishing. He encouraged her studies, urged her to think deeply, to speak with clarity, to never fear argument. "Stand by your principles," he would tell her, "even if you stand alone." In that small town, amid the clatter of tins and the faint hum of the church organ, Margaret began to build her inner fortress. She didn't yet know that the world would one day call her iron, but the metal was already forming, forged in simplicity, faith, and the quiet certainty that she was meant for something more. Years later, when she walked through the black doors of 10 Downing Street, reporters would call her cold, unfeeling, mechanical. But those who knew her story understood otherwise. Behind the steel lay the lessons of a grocer's daughter, a belief that duty was sacred, that strength was kindness in its most disciplined form, and that true power began with moral clarity. Before she ever led a nation, Margaret Thatcher learned to lead herself. And in that small corner of England, the Iron Lady was being born. Chapter 2. The Young Dreamer. At 19, Margaret Roberts stepped into Oxford with the same quiet determination she had carried since childhood. The stone walls, the echoing halls, the scent of old books. It was a world far removed from her father's shop in Grantham. Yet, even in that new and dazzling environment, she did not forget who she was. She was the grocer's daughter who believed that effort, not birthright, defined one's worth. Oxford was not merely a university. It was a crucible of intellect, class, and debate. For a young woman from the provinces, it could have been overwhelming. The air was thick with conversation about philosophy, politics, art, and the crumbling state of Europe as another war loomed over the horizon. While others spoke with the casual confidence of privilege, Margaret listened, absorbed. And then, when she finally spoke, did so with precision and conviction. Her voice was calm, measured, but firm. The kind that demanded attention, even in disagreement. She studied chemistry at Somerville College, one of the few women's colleges at Oxford. Science appealed to her orderly mind. Clear questions, exact answers, disciplined reasoning. Yet it wasn't just the elements and compounds that fascinated her. It was the structure behind them, the invisible logic that held everything together. The same clarity she found in chemistry would later shape her political thinking. that chaos could be tamed by structure, that facts mattered more than feelings. Voice was calm, measured, but firm, the kind that demanded attention, even in disagreement. She studied chemistry at Somerville College, one of the few women's colleges at Oxford. Science appealed to her orderly mind. Clear questions, exact answers, disciplined reasoning. Yet it wasn't just the elements and compounds that fascinated her. It was the structure behind them, the invisible logic that held everything together. The same clarity she found in chemistry would later shape her political thinking. That chaos could be tamed by structure, that facts mattered more than feelings. Still, there was a dreamer beneath the discipline. In quiet moments, walking along the River Cherwell or through the misty quads, she pondered the idea of purpose. What would it mean to make a mark on the world? Could one life truly change the course of a nation? These thoughts stirred in her a new kind of curiosity, not scientific, but moral and political.
She joined the Oxford University Conservative Association, quickly rising to its leadership ranks. It was rare for a woman to hold such a position, rarer still to command respect from her male peers. But Margaret did not shout or charm her way there. She reasoned her way there. Her arguments were crisp, her beliefs unbending. She spoke of freedom, individual responsibility, and hard work. Ideas that echoed her father's voice, but now sharpened by intellect and experience. Oxford was also where she first tasted the sting of dismissal. There were professors and classmates who laughed at her provincial accent, her unpolished manners, her relentless seriousness. They saw in her a woman who tried too hard to prove herself. But Margaret took every sneer, every smirk, as fuel. She learned early that ridicule was often the price of conviction. Outside the classroom, the world was shifting violently. The war had ended, but Britain was exhausted, rationed, rebuilding, uncertain of its future. Socialism was rising. The old order seemed to be crumbling. For Margaret, this was not a time to despair, but to act. She believed that values, not circumstances, defined destiny. In her final year, she gave a speech that caught the attention of local party members, a moment that would set her on the path to politics. She spoke not as a student, but as a visionary, calling for a society where individuals took responsibility for their lives, where hard work was rewarded, and where freedom was protected by courage, not comfort. When she left Oxford, she carried no illusions of privilege or entitlement. What she carried instead was conviction, cold, clear, and bright. The young dreamer from Grantham had found her calling, not in the lab, but in the arena of ideas, where belief would soon be tested by power. The seeds of the Iron Lady were no longer buried in childhood. They had begun to take root in the mind of a dreamer who refused to yield. Chapter 3: A Woman Among Men. When Margaret Thatcher entered politics, she stepped into a world that did not expect, nor entirely welcome, women. The British Parliament in the early 1950s was a realm of dark suits, cigar smoke, and old traditions. Women were few and far between, often confined to polite causes or quiet backbenches. Yet Margaret, still Margaret Roberts then, walked in with her usual poise and unshaken confidence, carrying a voice that could cut through the noise without ever needing to rise in volume. Her first campaign, for the constituency of Dartford in 1950, was a baptism of fire. She was only 24, young, female, and running as a Conservative in a working-class Labour stronghold. Reporters called her the pretty candidate,
and rarely mentioned her intellect. But when she spoke, even her opponents listened. Her speeches were sharp, logical, and passionate. She didn't rely on charm. She relied on clarity. "Politics," she said once, "is about persuasion, not popularity." Though she lost the election, she made headlines. The newspapers noted her calm under pressure, her discipline, and her energy. Behind the composure, though, she was quietly exhausted. Traveling, debating, and enduring endless questions that no male candidate was ever asked. How would she balance politics and family? Could a woman really be taken seriously in Parliament? Margaret would smile politely, answer firmly, and move on. Every condescending question hardened her resolve. In the midst of that campaign trail, she met Dennis Thatcher, a businessman, gentle in manner, loyal in heart. Unlike many men of his time, Dennis saw her ambition not as a threat, but as something to be protected. He admired her intellect, her drive, her refusal to yield. Their marriage would become one of mutual respect, even in silence. He gave her space to dream, and she gave his quiet support meaning. By 1959, Margaret Thatcher won her seat in Finchley. The moment she entered the House of Commons, she knew she was walking into a lion's den. The men around her spoke over one another. The corridors buzzed with rivalries and whispered alliances. But she observed before she struck, studied before she spoke. And when she finally rose to address the chamber, her voice, crisp, controlled, unmistakably feminine, filled the hall with authority.
Still, the prejudice was unrelenting. Male colleagues called her the Lady Chemist. Some mockingly called her bossy. Others dismissed her as a novelty. But Margaret never complained. She believed that respect was earned, not granted. Every speech, every late night spent studying policy, every sharp exchange in debate was a step toward proving she belonged. Not because she was a woman, but because she was competent. Her focus was relentless. While others sought favor or alliances, she sought understanding of economics, of governance, of power itself. She studied budgets late into the night, dissecting reports and questioning assumptions. Slowly, she built a reputation not as a token woman, but as one of the few who truly mastered the details. Yet, behind her steel, there was still the girl from Grantham, dutiful, disciplined, quietly yearning to make her father proud. She often remembered his words, "Never follow the crowd, Margaret. Let them follow you." The press began to notice her rise. A new kind of conservative, one wrote, practical, unsentimental, and utterly fearless. She was appointed to minor ministerial posts, learning the machinery of government. But she wanted more, not power for its own sake, but the power to act, to shape, to decide. In smoky committee rooms, she debated with men twice her age, and they found, to their surprise, that she never faltered. She listened, absorbed, and when she spoke, she dismantled arguments piece by piece. She did not need to shout to dominate the room. Her certainty was her armor, but the cost was solitude. Many colleagues kept their distance,
unsure how to approach a woman who neither flattered nor yielded. She became, even then, a solitary figure. Admired, respected, but rarely embraced. It was the beginning of a pattern that would follow her to the highest office. Power, always shadowed by isolation. In those formative years, Margaret Thatcher was not yet the Iron Lady, but the mold was cast. She had learned that to survive among men, she must be stronger than them, not in anger, but in resolve, not in volume, but in conviction. And as she looked across the chamber of Parliament, filled with voices that doubted her, she made a silent promise to herself, one that would echo through history. They will remember me. Chapter 4. Rise to Power. By the early 1970s, Margaret Thatcher had climbed steadily through the ranks of the Conservative Party. Her reputation was that of a tireless worker, sharp, meticulous, unflinching in debate. She was not one for grand gestures or poetic speeches. Instead, she spoke in clear, measured terms, each word weighed like currency. While others courted applause, she sought results. Her colleagues began to notice that when Margaret took a position, she rarely shifted. And if she did, it was never from fear.
In 1970, the Conservatives under Edward Heath returned to power, and Margaret was appointed Secretary of State for Education and Science, her first major cabinet role. It was a position that many saw as secondary, but she treated it as a proving ground. The department was vast, its challenges endless. Budgets, teachers' unions, curriculum reforms. Britain was facing inflation, industrial unrest, and growing social inequality. Amid the noise, she became known for one controversial decision: ending the free supply of milk to school children. The press mocked her mercilessly. Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher, they sneered, splashing her image across headlines. For most politicians, such ridicule might have been shattering. But Margaret did not retreat. She believed that leadership required difficult choices, and that the easy path, the one that pleased everyone, led nowhere. "I am not here to be loved," she once said. "I am here to do what must be done." The phrase would define her. Within the party, she gained both respect and resistance. Many admired her discipline. Others dismissed her as too strident, too ambitious, too sure of herself. But Margaret knew she was fighting on two fronts. One political, one cultural. It was not only socialism she had to confront. It was expectation itself. Britain was a country uneasy with change, and even less comfortable with strong women. As the decade wore on, economic turmoil deepened. Strikes crippled industries, unemployment soared, and the government appeared powerless. The sense of national decline hung heavy in the air. Inside the Conservative Party, whispers of discontent grew. The leadership, some said, had grown timid, uncertain, too willing to compromise. Margaret listened. Quietly, methodically, she began to form her own vision. A Britain renewed by self-reliance, discipline, and individual responsibility. She believed the state had grown too large, that dependency had replaced dignity. To her, Freedom meant the right to rise, not the comfort of being carried. By 1975, when the chance came, she acted. Against all odds, she challenged Edward Heath for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Few believed she could win. She was a woman, and worse, a woman who spoke her mind. Journalists treated her campaign as a curiosity. But behind her calm exterior, Margaret was relentless, traveling, persuading, speaking with quiet conviction. If you want something said, she told one audience, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. The line was bold, but it was more than wit. It was a declaration. When the results came in, the political establishment was stunned. She had done the impossible, defeated Heath, becoming the first woman to lead a major British political party. The press scrambled for explanations. Some called it luck, others audacity. But those who knew her story saw something simpler: preparation meeting opportunity. Her ascent marked a turning point not just for her, but for Britain. The country was weary of drift, desperate for clarity. Margaret Thatcher promised firmness, a return to purpose. Yet, behind the triumph, she understood what was coming. Leadership was not a crown. It was a burden.
As she stood before the cameras, accepting her new role, her voice was calm but steady. "We must have the courage of our convictions," she said. "For without conviction, there is no hope." The Iron Lady was not yet forged in history's fire, but the heat was rising. The battles ahead would test every belief she held and every scar she had earned. And for the first time, Britain was about to be led not by a man of power, but by a woman of will.
Chapter 5. The Iron Lady. When Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979, Britain stood at a crossroads, weary, divided, and uncertain of its future. The nation had been battered by strikes, inflation, and a creeping sense of decline. To many, it felt as though the great industrial heart of Britain had lost its rhythm. But to Margaret, it was not the heart that was weak, it was the will. Her first day at 10 Downing Street was not a triumphal entry, but a mission. As she walked past the black door and into the echoing halls, she carried with her not just ambition, but a vision. To restore Britain's confidence, to make it stand tall again. "Where there is doubt, may we bring faith," she quoted softly, paraphrasing St. Francis of Assisi. But her idea of faith was not gentle. It was forged in discipline, self-reliance, and courage. Almost immediately, she moved to curb inflation and reduce the power of the unions. The strikes that had paralyzed the nation in the 1970s, the so-called Winter of Discontent, had convinced her that Britain could not move forward if held hostage by collective demands. She sought to break that grip, and with it, the old idea that government must endlessly intervene to appease. It was a brutal battle. As industries closed and unemployment rose, protests erupted across the country. Newspapers painted her as heartless, out of touch, even cruel. But Margaret believed that the pain was temporary, the discipline necessary. "If you give in once," she said, "you give in forever."
In the face of relentless criticism, her resolve only hardened. The Soviet press, watching her fierce stand against socialism, mockingly called her the Iron Lady. The title was meant as an insult. She embraced it as armor. "I stand proudly before you," she declared, "as the Iron Lady of the Western world." The nickname captured her essence perfectly. Strength, clarity, and defiance. But it also masked the quiet toll of leadership. Behind closed doors, she was not immune to fatigue or loneliness. The late nights at Downing Street stretched endlessly. Decisions about jobs, wars, and lives carried a weight few could bear. Yet, she rarely revealed the strain, not even to Denis. Her belief was simple: leaders do not show weakness. Her economic reforms began to bite. Inflation fell, productivity rose, and foreign investors returned. The road was rough, but the direction was firm. To her supporters, she was the savior of a sinking nation. To her critics, the destroyer of communities. Yet Margaret never measured success by approval. She measured it by endurance. Her speeches became sharper, her tone more unyielding. "There is no such thing as society," she once said, a line often misunderstood. What she meant was not the absence of compassion, but the primacy of personal responsibility. To her, the greatness of Britain lay not in government, but in its people, their grit, their independence, their will to rise. Still, her strength came with a cost. The harder she pushed, the more isolated she became. Even within her own party, some whispered that her rule was too severe, too absolute. But she paid no mind. "If you set out to be liked," she once told a young MP, "you will accomplish nothing." By the early 1980s, she had become both a figure of admiration and fear, a leader who divided yet defined her era. The Iron Lady had arrived, not by chance, but by choice. She had built herself in the image of the principles she preached: unwavering, unapologetic, unbreakable. And as Britain began to stir from its long slumber, Margaret Thatcher stood tall at its helm. A woman of conviction, steering a nation through storm and doubt. Whether history would judge her kindly or harshly, she had already made her mark. The Iron Lady was no longer a symbol. She was reality. Living proof that belief, when held without compromise, could move the world itself. Chapter 6. The Falklands and the Flame of Leadership. In the spring of 1982, few could have predicted that a small, windswept cluster of islands in the South Atlantic, the Falklands, would ignite one of the defining moments of Margaret Thatcher's premiership. The islands were tiny, remote, and sparsely populated. Yet, when Argentina's military junta invaded, asserting their claim, they struck not just at British territory, but at something far deeper: Britain's pride and Thatcher's sense of principle. When news reached her, Thatcher's reaction was immediate. She did not waver, did not stall. "They are British," she said firmly, "and they will remain British." To her, it was not merely about land.
It was about identity. About whether Britain would stand tall or shrink into timidity. The post-war years had left the nation uncertain of its strength. The Falklands became a test of will, her will, and of Britain's belief in itself. Her advisors warned her of the risks. The islands lay 8,000 miles away. Supply lines were long, and the sea was treacherous. Military success was far from guaranteed. But Thatcher's conviction was unshakable. Defeat, she declared, is not an option. She knew that surrender would signal not only weakness to the world, but despair at home. As the task force sailed south, Britain held its breath. Ships disappeared over the horizon while families waited by the radio. Headlines filled with doubt. Critics accused her of playing politics with lives. Yet, beneath the noise, something began to shift. The public, once weary and divided, started to rally behind her. Her determination rekindled a sense of pride that had long lain dormant. The fighting was fierce, brutal, and costly. Men died in icy waters, ships burned under grey skies. Thatcher followed every report, every telegram. She rarely slept. But she never let emotion cloud her decisions. In her solitude, she prayed, not for victory, but for courage. And when the tide finally turned, when British forces retook the islands after 74 tense days, she met the cameras with composure, her voice calm and measured. "Rejoice," she said simply. One word, but it carried the weight of a nation's relief and pride. The victory changed everything. Her approval ratings soared. Those who had called her reckless now hailed her as resolute. She was no longer just a prime minister. She was the embodiment of defiance, the Iron Lady, whose resolve could bend history itself. But triumph has a way of transforming those who taste it. The Falklands victory did not soften her. It steeled her. It confirmed what she had always believed, that conviction and courage were the only paths to leadership. Her confidence deepened into certainty. Her circle of trusted advisors grew smaller. She began to see compromise as weakness, dissent as disloyalty. Yet, even at her most unyielding, there were moments, fleeting and private, when the weight of command pressed heavily upon her. Alone in her office, long after the lights of Downing Street dimmed, she would sit among scattered papers and cooling tea, her thoughts wandering to the men who would never return. She wrote letters to their families by hand. Few saw that side of her, and fewer still understood how deeply she carried their loss. The Falklands War became more than a military campaign. It was a story of national rebirth. Britain, once called the sick man of Europe, rediscovered its voice. And Thatcher, standing at the center of it all, emerged not just as a political figure, but as a symbol of endurance, of conviction, of a nation refusing to bow. But that same fire would also cast shadows. Power, once a means to serve, began to feel like destiny. The victory that had united a nation
also began to isolate its leader. For Margaret Thatcher, the Falklands was both a triumph and a turning point. The moment when her flame of leadership burned brightest, and when it began, quietly, to consume her from within. Chapter 7. The Lonely Peak of Power. The years after the Falklands victory were Margaret Thatcher's golden years, and also her loneliest. She had climbed to the very summit of political power, a figure admired, feared, and unchallenged. Yet, as her influence expanded beyond Britain, something within her world began to shrink. The Iron Lady, who once drew energy from the roar of Parliament and the warmth of public support, now ruled from a mountain of solitude. By the mid-1980s, Britain was changing fast. The economy was booming again, but not for everyone. Towering financial centres rose in London, while coal towns fell silent. To Thatcher, this was the price of progress, the inevitable pain of renewal. She had fought the unions, dismantled nationalised industries, and broken the old order that, in her view, had kept Britain weak. She called it liberation. Others called it destruction. Yet Thatcher saw herself as a surgeon, not a destroyer. "The medicine is harsh," she once said, "but the patient needs it to live." The patient, of course, was Britain, and she believed no one else had the strength to make the incision. Her faith in free markets was not merely economic, it was moral. People, she believed, should rise by their own effort, not by the grace of government. But that faith, carried too far, began to make her blind to those left behind. Her cabinet had grown cautious, her critics more daring. The opposition called her heartless. The press painted her as detached. Yet, every morning, she still woke before dawn, reading reports, scribbling notes in the margins, her tea going cold beside her. She worked with a ferocity that unsettled even her aides. Her secretaries remembered her pacing at midnight, rehearsing speeches to the empty walls. "The price of greatness," she once murmured, "is eternal vigilance." Her confidence, however, had become isolation. The same strength that had once united her party now began to divide it. Ministers who dared to question her found themselves dismissed or humiliated. Some feared her temper, others feared her silence. To the world, she was decisive. To those around her, she had become unreachable, a force rather than a person. And yet, behind the public armor, there was a woman who still longed for understanding. Friends recalled moments when her voice softened, when she spoke of her father, the grocer who taught her thrift and duty. "He would not have approved of waste," she said once, staring out a window after a long cabinet meeting. In those moments, the Iron Lady gave way to Margaret Roberts of Grantham, the daughter who had learned to be strong because no one else would be. The world stage adored her resolve. She stood beside Ronald Reagan, her ideological soulmate, united in their vision of freedom over communism. Together, they reshaped global politics, confronting the Soviet Union not only with weapons, but with willpower. Mikhail Gorbachev respected her, even as they sparred across conference tables. "We can do business together," she had famously said of him, a sentence that hinted at the Iron Lady's pragmatism beneath the steel. But the higher she climbed, the thinner the air became. Power had become a solitary pursuit. Even in victory, There was fatigue, an ache that success could not soothe. She began to speak more in absolutes, to listen less, to trust few. Britain's social fabric was tearing in ways she refused to see. If you want something said, ask a man, she liked to quip. If you want something done, ask a woman. Yet, increasingly, she was the only woman, and the only one doing anything at all. By 1987, she had won her third term, an achievement unmatched in modern British politics. Yet, on the night of her victory, she did not celebrate. Sitting alone in the study of number 10, she wrote in her diary, "The fight goes on. It always will." There was no rest, no reflection, only forward motion. In that moment, it was clear. The Iron Lady had not conquered power. She had become its prisoner. She stood at the lonely peak of her own creation, the highest and coldest place in the world. Chapter 8. The Fall of the Iron Lady. By the end of the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher stood at the height of her power and on the edge of her downfall. For over a decade, she had reshaped Britain in her own image, strong, disciplined, and unyielding. Yet, power, once in armor, had begun to isolate her. The Iron Lady, who had stared down enemies abroad and opposition at home, was now facing a quieter, more dangerous battle, one within her own ranks. Her third term as Prime Minister was marked by triumphs, but also by fatigue. Britain had changed. The economy had stabilized, but inequality had deepened. The streets that once cheered her name now echoed with protests against the poll tax, against unemployment, against the feeling that she no longer listened. "We have become a divided nation," one of her ministers murmured. And in a way, Thatcher had become a divided woman, the visionary reformer who refused to see that her revolution had gone too far. She had built her legacy on conviction, but conviction had hardened into certainty. Cabinet meetings grew tense. Ministers who had once admired her now felt suffocated by her dominance. She interrupted, dismissed, and scolded those who questioned her. Her famous certainty, once a symbol of leadership, began to look like arrogance. And yet, deep down, Thatcher believed she was still fighting for the soul of Britain. "You turn if you want to," she had once said. "The lady's not for turning." Those words, once a rallying cry, now sounded like a curse. The first cracks appeared over Europe. Thatcher despised the idea of giving away British sovereignty to the growing European community. Many in her party, however, saw integration as the future. Her resistance alienated even loyal allies. When Geoffrey Howe, her long-serving deputy and one of her most trusted ministers, resigned in protest, his speech in Parliament cut deep. It was calm, measured, devastating. "It is rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease," he said, only for them to find their bats have been broken by the team captain before the game. Those words struck a nerve not only in Westminster, but in Thatcher herself. For the first time, she saw rebellion not from her enemies, but from her own. Days later, her former ally, Michael Heseltine, challenged her for leadership. The Conservative Party, once her fortress, had turned uncertain. Though she won the first round of voting, it was not enough. The Iron Lady, who had led Britain through war and recession, now found herself alone, surrounded by silence. On the evening of November 21st, 1990, she sat in the Downing Street study, the same room where she had once written speeches of triumph. Her husband, Dennis, poured her a drink. Her eyes were steady, but distant. The woman who had faced down generals and presidents was now wrestling with the one battle she could not win: the will of her own party. "It's over," Dennis said softly. She nodded, not in defeat, but in recognition. The era she had built was ending. The next morning, she announced her resignation. As she left Number 10 for the last time, tears glistened in her eyes. "We leave Downing Street for the last time, after 11.5 wonderful years," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The cameras captured the moment, the mixture of sorrow and pride that only comes when a legend steps off the stage. The Iron Lady had not broken. She had melted, quietly, with dignity. Her fall was not a collapse, but a conclusion. She had changed her country, for better and for worse, and in doing so, had written herself into the pages of history. Power had cost her everything: her friends, her party, and finally, her throne. Yet even in her fall, she remained unmistakably herself. Resolute, unbowed, and unforgotten. Chapter 9: The Legacy and the Shadows. When Margaret Thatcher left Downing Street in 1990, she did not vanish. She lingered, like the echo of a storm that had reshaped the land. Her departure marked the end of an era, but not the end of her influence. Britain had been irrevocably transformed. The Iron Lady's shadow stretched across every corner of the nation, in its economy, its politics, its identity. For her supporters, she was the savior of Britain, the woman who rescued the country from decline, restored its confidence, and made it once again a force on the world stage. She broke the power of the unions, curbed inflation, and encouraged individual enterprise. To them, she was a visionary who refused to be swayed by popularity or sentiment. "She gave us back our pride," one supporter recalled. "She made Britain believe again." But for her critics, her legacy was darker. They saw communities torn apart by her reforms, industries abandoned, and a growing divide between rich and poor. Entire towns that had depended on coal, steel, or manufacturing were left behind, their people feeling forgotten. "She rebuilt the nation," a miner once said bitterly, "but not for us." And so her story became one of paradox, a leader both revered and reviled, remembered as much for her iron will as for the wounds she left behind. History, as always, would argue endlessly about her. But even her enemies could not deny her impact. She had redefined what leadership meant: uncompromising, unapologetic, and deeply personal. In her later years, she remained a formidable figure. She gave speeches around the world, met with leaders who once feared her, and continued to voice her opinions with the same conviction as ever. But time, as it does to all legends, began to soften her edges. Her health declined after the death of her beloved Denis. Friends noticed the change.
the once indomitable energy giving way to quiet reflection. "It's strange," she said in an interview, her voice faintly wistful, "to live long enough to see your own history debated." She watched the country move on without her, a Britain that was more global, more diverse, and yet still wrestling with the same questions she had fought over. Freedom versus fairness, strength versus compassion. And in many ways, she remained part of those questions. Politicians still invoked her name, some proudly, others cautiously, as if seeking to borrow or banish her ghost. In 2013, when she passed away, Britain paused. Crowds lined the streets for her funeral, some holding flowers, others holding protest signs. Even in death, she divided the nation she had once ruled. Yet as her coffin was carried through the grey London air, there was a sense of finality, the closing of a chapter that had defined a generation. Her legacy was neither pure light nor pure shadow. It was something more complex. The mark of a leader who believed that conviction could change the world, and proved that it could, though never without cost. She had once said, "I am not a consensus politician. I am a conviction politician." And that conviction, fierce, polarizing, and unforgettable, remains her truest monument. The Iron Lady may have fallen, but her echo still rings in the halls of power, in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the lives of those who never forgot her. Chapter 10. Lessons from the Iron Lady. What remains of Margaret Thatcher today is not just the memory of a leader, but a set of lessons, sharp, complicated, enduring. To study her life is to walk a path between triumph and turmoil, between courage and consequence. She was not a perfect leader, but she was a complete one, flawed, human, and fearless. Her first lesson lies in conviction. Thatcher believed that leadership begins with belief, not in polls or popularity, but in principles. She once said, if you set out to be liked, you would be prepared to compromise on anything at any time, and you would achieve nothing. To her, conviction was not stubbornness for its own sake. It was faith in a vision so clear that it could withstand storms. In a world where politics often bends to convenience, that kind of certainty is rare and dangerous, but also deeply powerful. The second lesson is courage. Few leaders have faced such opposition, such scorn, such relentless pressure. Yet Thatcher thrived in confrontation. Her courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. She endured insults, isolation, and immense responsibility, yet never let emotion dictate direction. Being powerful is like being a lady, she once quipped. If you have to tell people you are, you aren't. Power, in her eyes, came from composure, from being unshaken when the world trembled. But perhaps her most haunting lesson is the cost of power itself. Thatcher rose higher than any woman before her, yet the peak she conquered was lonely and cold. She proved that strength can build nations, but also that it can build walls. Her story warns us that conviction without compassion becomes tyranny, and courage without humility becomes isolation. She changed Britain forever, but the price of that change was steep. Paid not only by the country, but by the woman herself. And still, her influence endures. In the decades since her fall, her ideas continue to ripple through history. Some celebrate her as a beacon of freedom, others remember her as a storm. But no one can ignore her, love her or loathe her. She remains a mirror, reflecting what leadership can achieve and what it can destroy. Margaret Thatcher once said, "Watch your thoughts, for they become actions." Her thoughts became history, bold, divisive, unforgettable. And whether we admire her resolve or question her legacy, one truth remains. The Iron Lady never truly left. Her lessons still whisper through the corridors of power, asking us, in our own time, in our own way, to decide what we will stand for and what we are willing to stand alone for. History remembers many leaders, but few with the clarity and contradiction of Margaret Thatcher. She was, above all else, a woman who refused to bend, not to pressure, not to fear, not to the passing winds of opinion. Her voice, sharp and certain, carved its way through decades of uncertainty, leaving behind a trail of both admiration and resentment. She showed the world that strength has a price, that conviction can both build and break, and that leadership, at its purest, demands solitude. The Iron Lady was not born from steel. She was forged by struggle, by belief, by an unyielding will to shape her country's destiny, even when the world stood against her. History remembers many leaders, but few with the clarity and contradiction of Margaret Thatcher. She was, above all else, a woman who refused to bend, not to pressure, not to fear, not to the passing winds of opinion. Her voice, sharp and certain, carved its way through decades of uncertainty, leaving behind a trail of both admiration and resentment. She showed the world that strength has a price, that conviction can both build and break, and that leadership, at its purest, demands solitude. The Iron Lady was not born from steel. She was forged by struggle, by belief, by an unyielding will to shape her country's destiny, even when the world stood against her.